Welcome to Martini time, my favorite time of the day. So, this morning we were talking about 1968 and the crack in the cultural egg. So, I wanted to pick that up a little bit today. I don't know if people that are watching were watching this morning or not. That's the difficulty of having two talks. And but I do carry out I was going to say the color scheme, but the idea theme that runs through my life day by day. And so it's an adventure of ideas. It's like Sherlock, following the scent of an idea and letting it take you where it wants to. And this is the way of personal enlightenment, a personal realization, is that you have to become a detective. You have to become sensitive to the dots and the connections and the circumstances and the insignificant things that happen and the random things that happen. The whole works, the whole field is full of clues, is full of dots, inviting you to connect them. And of course, the risk is that you prematurely connect them. And you say, like in the mystery detectives, aha, he did it. No, you connected the dots before all the dots were revealed. So there is I think the Sherlock process here is to suspend judgment and to just be curious and let the idea unfold itself. Naturally, until you know. So there's a sense of knowing what the truth is in your life. And so the title of this talk is Getting Off the Culture Train. So getting back on track to the 60s, in 1968, what I described, there was an external crack in the egg, or the cultural egg, and there was an internal crack, which was in me. And these reflected each other, oddly enough. My personal search for wholeness and completeness seemed to have reached a cracking point in 1968, just as the American culture reached a cracking point in 1968, when the Vietnamese War protests and civil rights and the assassinations and the riots and the women's rights and hippies and rock and roll and all of it just came to a big point of cracking open. Not to mention the LSD, psychedelics. What do we think all that was about, you see? You look back at the psychedelics, look back at the hippies, look back at the fashion. It was an explosion in color. It was an explosion in fluid forms. Everything was fluid. Everything was fluid. There was a consciousness that was waking, that was not horizontal. There was a consciousness that was exploding, coming out, that was not flat and black and white. Color. Remember when color TV came? Everything was black and white. Color. Whoa. The CinemaScope. Color. Suddenly the world was in color, you see. So we have to look at what was happening from a really wide-angle lens here and not see it in just as, oh, the hippies, oh, psychedelics, oh, the drugs, LSD, I don't know. I know all about that. No, we have to really wash our eyes, blink away the fog, and take off the cultural glasses to see what's really going on. And a study of the 60s is a great place to start. And Mad Men is very available. I watched it twice. And this Ken Burns documentary is another way to look at the 60s through the lens of a objective portrayal. But see, the 60s was a subjective experience. There was a subjective awakening that broke through the objective world and divided it right in half. And that division is still going on. It morphs into all different kinds of shapes. In the 60s, or in the 50s, when news was reported, it was not emotional news. It was more, you got it in the newspapers, and it was just objective facts. And today, everything you'll notice, everything is emotional and feelings. How do you feel? Everybody wants to know how you feel. It's very, so this I guess I shouldn't go on this, I should stay back with my original idea here, getting off the culture train, is that the American, and then we had Soul Train, remember that? I remember it had all these breaking through musical companies and tracks, and there was such a creative time then. And then notice how in the 70s it began to it began to be corrupted by culture. The purity of the 60s eruption got absorbed by culture. So you had the horrible fashions of the 70s, which were androgynous. Basically, men were moving towards looking like women and women looking like men. So you had this mix. And then you had the incorporation of the drugs into culture. And then you had the racial riots. And then you had new rights like prison rights, and everybody was getting a new right. The retarded were getting rights. Everybody was getting rights. And everything seemed to be disintegrating. And we called in Dirty Harry. And we called in John Wayne. And we called in the super cops who didn't care for law and order. You feel lucky, punk? You punk, you don't have any rights. Get back in line. See, this reaction. And what happens when culture breaks is that culture repairs itself. And this happens in the same thing in our personal life. You have a break in your cultural, your ego. Ego is your cultural egg. All right, understand what culture is, an egg, and we're all living inside of it. Ego is a microcosm of the larger egg. And the ego has it is an exact replica of the culture. It thinks it's separate, but it isn't. It's interrelated to the culture, so that the ego thinks what the culture thinks. So if the ego thinks it's free from culture, you can be sure it's not. So the break in the cultural egg, which happened in the 60s, a lot of people dropped out. And, they started little hippie communes, or it was back to nature. And there was a definite shift in consciousness. I mean, a literal shift in reference. So that you were talking to one person whose reference was the culture, and the morality of the culture, and the patriotism of the culture, and that person who had shifted was not there. There was no reference to each other. You can't really communicate with somebody unless you both reference the same whole, In other words, we all communicate in our culture because our reference is our culture. I mean, the language, the shared events, the history, what's going on, the conflicts within the culture, the movies, the arts, and all that. So everything we talk with each other is reference to the culture, what's happening in the egg, you see. Now, if you shift, if there's a sudden dropout, and you no longer have a reference to that culture for meaning, you're very much alone. It's the definition of insanity. So when a person drops into insanity, they have no reference to the normal reality, and people can't communicate with them. But if a person drops out of the culture and the reference changes to the ground of reality that is prior to the culture, this field, this ground of being that Paul Tillich called God, this ground of being, you see, when the reference is to that, you're still in the culture, but you're not of it. You could still work in the culture, but it doesn't affect you. You can walk right through it without being hurt. People can spit on you. People can call you names. It doesn't hurt. It comes off like Teflon. Because your reference is no longer to the culture, and your ego status, your identity is no longer a place in the culture. So if you no longer, it's like your family. So you go up in a family and it has a place in it. Brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, everybody has a place. There's the silly sister, and there's the strong brother, and there's the rebel brother, and everybody's got kind of like their position, so it's a table setting. And when you go away and you come home, it pulls you back into that setting. When I used to go home, people call me Eddie. Eddie's back. Well, who's Eddie? Nobody called me Eddie. But anyway, we all know that experience when a family is a culture. It's a mini culture of the larger culture. And when we go back to the family, we feel ourselves being pulling in. And then we look at our watch and say, how long do I have to stay here before I can get back to my freedom? You see. Because we realize that we've outgrown the clones. Or if you leave your hometown and you go live in the big city, and you come back years later and your high school friends are still where you left them. And you say, they're still talking about the same stuff we did when I was here. The placemat, the cultural placemat. And we don't like to leave home because we'll be out of place. So when we get back home, I feel at home again. I know my place. Everything's in place, you see. So of course, if the home, the placemat, if the table is happy, we feel secure there. But if it's a dysfunctional table where we have got to get out, and if we go back, we feel the dysfunction pulling us back. I thought I was free from that. It's coming to get me. My angry father is coming to get me. He's pulling me back into that painful childhood, you see. So we all experience that, the mini culture of family. But we don't recognize the larger culture and the pain it creates. Because you see, culture is a semantic language field. It's a field of language. It's a field of thought. And it's an abstraction of reality, of the ground. In the same way that this egg, if I say egg, this is an egg, an emu egg. Okay, that's an emu. Oh, it's broken. And then I could tell you all about this egg, you see. But you don't know the egg. You just know the name of it. And you're interested in the cultural memory of it. Egg is a cultural name. It's English. We say egg. We know it's an egg. Well, what kind of? That's a general term. Well, what kind of egg? Emu egg. Oh, emu egg. Okay. Then well, this is a broken emu egg. Oh, it's a broken emu egg. Okay. And then we say, well, how big is it? Oh, it's that big. And then how much does it weigh? All right. How does it feel? Well, it's rough, you see. So we can qualify it. We can name it, but we don't know what this is in itself, because this in itself is prior to our naming of it and the known of it. The egg itself is unknown. All we know is the known. But when we slip out from under the known of it, it's an egg, it becomes a metaphor. So this is an egg, an old egg, a broken egg, a gray egg, a spotted egg, an egg with a hole in the back. I guess that's where the chick tried to get out, and then he broke out here in the front. Okay? But so this is the qualities and all that. Weigh it, measure it, look inside, Oh, some egg chips in there. Put them back. So that's all the quality of it. But we don't know the essence of the egg, because all we know is what we know about the egg. So in this way, the egg then becomes, the way I see it, the egg becomes, it's an egg, but it's also a metaphor for me breaking out of culture. This is me. Je suis the egg. I am Charlie. Je suis the egg. Now that means that makes this a metaphor. Je suis the egg. What does that mean? So now the egg takes on a different meaning. Now there's the factual, known, external, objective meaning of the egg that goes in the encyclopedia and the dictionaries and into the biologist's lab and up on the board on the chart of all the different sizes of eggs. You see, it's all cataloged, all known, all defined. We know everything there is about this egg, you see. But when I say je suis the egg, you know nothing about this egg. But I know something about it. So the egg now is a metaphor for my breaking out of the cultural egg in 1968. Or you, when you break out of the cultural egg, out of the family, out of the hometown, out of your church, whatever you break out of, je suis the egg. So then that becomes very rich and very poetic, you see. And that's why I keep this. Because when I see it, it reminds me of the breaking out of the egg, because you have to continuously break out of the egg, because the egg is constantly repairing itself. The cultural egg, the family egg, the ego egg is constantly sealing it up again, you see. It's constantly sealing it up again, like algae seals up the hole. You make a little face, a little claret, clear space in a pond of algae. Take your hand away and it'll go right back. You make a little space in culture, take your hand away, it'll go right back. So this whole idea of spiritual disciplines and meditation and yoga and mindfulness and all of those practices are pecking a hole in the cultural egg. You're on the inside pecking out. You're on the inside, it's your heart that's pecking out. Your mind is the egg. Your mind is held hostage by culture. Your mind thinks in English or whatever, and you see according to cultural memory. Everything we see, recognize, TV, everything, all the pop stars, the music, the movies, everything you see, we all know because we're in the culture. We're like a fish in a fish bowl, but we don't see the fish bowl. We're in a cultural egg, but we don't see the egg. There's a whole world in there. And it's a lot like Russian nesting dolls, in that in a cultural egg, there are subcultures, you see. So you have the great American egg, and then you have within it all the little subcultures. You got your Protestants, you got your Catholics, you got your Jews, you got your Muslims, all these different, you got your hippies, you got your alt-right, you got your alt-left, you got your Democrats and your Republicans, you got all these little subcultures, each one believing they're out of the egg. But they're in the egg, you see. It's just the Russian nesting dolls. So when you get out of the egg, you have to go alone. You can't take anybody with you. The chick is born. It doesn't take all the chicks with it. There's only one chick in there, it's you. So you have to peck at it. And when you make a little hole, you get an insight. When you make a little hole, you get the idea that there's something on the other side of the egg. You get the idea that there's something greater than just me in this little egg. There's something greater than just this ego, this little self, this little me, that's frustrated and cramped and irritated and uncomfortable and dissatisfied. Thoreau says mankind lives in quiet desperation. That's what it feels like inside the egg, you see. So a few of us begin to pick. And once that little bit of light comes in, now we're on a spiritual journey. Now we hear the call. Now we hear the call of adventure. Now we hear the call of the soul, God, the heart. Now we're beginning the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell writes about. And it's all about breaking out of the cultural egg, you see. And at some point, if we are sincere and single-minded, at some point we'll fall out. And we'll see the whole culture. We'll be in it. We'll work in it. We'll communicate in it, but we'll be free of it. So anyway, thank you for dropping in, and I'll see you tomorrow morning.